Maaza, thank you so much for making time for this conversation and for being part of our event and supporting the Young Center's work.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I am such a big fan of what the Young Center does. It's really an honor to be here. And I feel like you guys are more necessary now than you've ever been. So I'm really glad to be able to do this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My first question is a little bit about your book. Your book tells the story of one of the first conflicts that sparked World War II, which countless books have been dedicated to, rightly. However, this was the first time I read a book from this specific perspective, from the perspective of people in Ethiopia, and focused almost entirely on the experiences of the powerful women who took up arms against Italian invasion. Why was it so important to write this book now?
The book has been many years in the making, and I didn't know if it would ever be published. I didn't know if I would ever finish it. So the fact that it's coming out right now feels like a wonderful surprise and a gift to me. But I think it's interesting that it's coming out at a time when we are really questioning fascism again, and authoritarianism and political aggressions, and also the role of women in world history. We've been having these conversations now for many years. The Me Too movement, is powerful, has been powerful, but also this story puts Africans and Black women at the center of world history, which is something that I wanted to do, but I didn't know I would finish the book right now. And we are having these national and global conversations. So it just seemed to come together in a really interesting way. I hope when people read the book that they understand that this is just one story and one book, and women from different cultures and different moments of history have always been there, but often they've been overlooked.
Thank you so much, Maaza. I really love that so much of the book is focused on women. Of course, it's focused on the immense power that women have to change society, but it also shows the ways in which, especially in times of war, women bear the brunt of conflict as bodies become an extension of the battlefield. Even today, we see that with the abuse, enslavement, reproductive and sexualized violence and exploitation of women faced by women in the Iraq and Syria war with Yazidi women in China, Rohingya women in Myanmar, and even the sexual abuse of women in the military in the United States, women continue to bear the brunt of violence and conflict. Tell us about why it was important for you to highlight this in the book.
I think that this is something that it's been such a part of world history that we don't ever really think to talk about it. The fact that women are both the trophies of war, the contested territory that war is fought, over, and also they bear the brunt of what happens in the home when men come home from war. I was really interested in the ways that women have been parts of conflict, both global and domestic, and the way that women's bodies have been used as bargaining chips or ways to, I don't know what the word is, I guess ways to define what masculinity and what manhood is. And that's usually through a form of aggression or sexual violence. And for me, I didn't set out to write the book to talk about these things. I just simply wanted to write the stories of women. And I understood very quickly that writing the stories of women meant tackling head on the stories of men and what it means to be a man, which is often at the expense of what it means to be a woman. And that was something that I realized I could not speak about war unless I spoke about women. And I couldn't speak about women unless I spoke about men. So the book felt like a series of questions that just kept speaking to each other as I was writing it. And I think you're absolutely right in the things that we're seeing even now with experiences of women in Iraq, in Syria, in Mexico, in Guatemala, in Honduras, in the United States. We're seeing that the experiences of women have often been controlled. The narrative has been controlled for political reasons. And those stories are created by men. And they tell us how to speak and think of women and, think of ourselves. And I wanted to write women who were simply defining themselves for themselves. And that it was really interesting for me to write about that and realize for them to speak of themselves, they are really actually speaking against all these other narratives that have already been created for them.
I love that point about women getting to define what womanhood is versus it always having been defined by what masculinity is. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had the opportunity to hear you speak at Politics and Prose, and you spoke a little bit about the whole process of gathering information for this book and the primary sources you found, and just the extensive amount of work that went into gathering the information for The Shadow King. Could you tell us a little bit about that process and what it was like?
It was a really long process. I think you remember when I was talking about it at Politics and Prose. I didn't think it would be like that. There was at some point in the writing of the book, I said, if I knew then what I know now, I may not have started the book. If I understood how long it would take. It took many years of going through archives and realizing that the archives were also a set of I don't know, what's the word? This was a very carefully crafted narrative left behind by the fascists. All the newspaper articles I was reading, the photographs that were taken by photojournalists, the newsreels I was watching, those were things that were left behind to tell us how to think about this war and to tell us how to remember. And I wanted to figure out a way to break out of that. And part of my experience with this book that made it so enriching was that I started talking to people. I started talking to Italians whose relatives had fought in Ethiopia or who had been based, in Eritrea. I started looking for soldiers' letters and their photographs. I started looking through diaries and journals that they left behind. And that was where the story came alive, because in those things, they were uncensored. And I was getting a better sense of the history. And of course, going back and talking to people in Ethiopia, doing site research, listening to what people who lived in the areas that I was interested in, what they were telling me about their relatives who were part of the war. That was wonderful for me. That was the book, really, that human contact.
Yeah. And your point about what's left behind is often intentional and what's erased from history is definitely by design, which is why I think it's so powerful that you have launched an online archive dedicated to women warriors of Ethiopia. Tell us how that's going and how the idea came to you.
Well, it's called project3541.com. And I've been collecting photographs that soldiers took in Ethiopia, in Eritrea from 1935 to 1941. I've been doing this for a number of years, many, many years actually. And now I'm putting the archives online. And I'm also asking people to send photographs of their families, relatives, any photographs they have that's connected to this history. I'm gathering them up. The pandemic came and everything stopped in this world, including this website a little bit. But I've been getting stories still, and I am slowly putting things up, doing a little bit more research for them. So it is going to be an online archive, and I'm asking people to share their stories. I have Ethiopians telling me stories, sharing photographs. I have Eritreans, Somali, but I also have Italians. And that has been a wonderful extension of what my original idea was. I realized very, very quickly that this was also their history. They have questions. Some of their relatives had histories in Ethiopia that they don't know and they want to know more, but they may have a photograph or two. So I'm asking them to share with me as well, and we will put them up on that site.
I also know that you have a personal connection to the war and to the incredible women warriors. How did you find out about that? Because I find this hilarious. And how has it been knowing that this is a part of your family history?
The story is that I was at the end of this book. I had written this book and I was in the process of doing some last minute research. And I went to Ethiopia and went to one of the battle sites that I needed to see. My mom went with me. It was a road trip. We were driving, 8 hours at a time. We spent 6 days on the road. And when we came back to Addis Ababa, I was talking to her again, mentioning some photographs I found of women who had been in the war. And she very casually said, well, what about your great-grandmother? And every time I think of this story, I can't believe it. First of all the years that she knows that I've been working on this and the conversations we've had, she knew what I was doing. And then we were just on the road talking about all of this. So my great-grandmother was a girl during the start of the war. And when the call came to mobilize the armies in the area, the families were told that the eldest of every family was to go get their gun and enlist. My great-grandmother was the oldest. She had 3 younger brothers, but she was in an arranged marriage, and her husband was an adult man. She was still a young girl. She was too young to live with her husband, so she still lived at home. And her father said, "You're too young to go. Your husband will get my gun." And she didn't like her husband. And she said, "That's my gun." And I cannot imagine the fight that must have gone on in that household. She took her father to court and pled her case in front of the village judges, and she won. They gave her the gun, and she enlisted. She went to go to the front. And this is just in my family, and I had no idea about this. And it makes me think about what we value as history, because I knew the stories of the men in my family, and I had never heard this at all. But my aunts knew it, my mother knew it, and it also makes me think that the stories of women are often kept in the spaces of women, in the kitchens, in the homes, in the bedrooms where they gather and talk. No one thinks that that's history. And yet here it is. It's very much a part of world history.
I just love that story. And I think about it often because I am from Afghanistan and we have fought against colonialism and many of our wars too. There are always myths of women warriors who abandon their homes or dress as men and go lines, but there hasn't been this kind of historical recounting and this kind of study into it. So I think I'm just fascinated.
I really hope that someone does that history of Afghanistan, because I think that's first of all, it's a rich history. But to look at it from the perspective of women is something that I think would be incredibly interesting and powerful for the entire world. So whoever's listening, I hope they do it.
Me too. Thank you so much, Maaza. I don't have any other questions, but I wanted to just give a moment in case there's anything you want to add or a message or anything like that.
I just want to thank everybody at the Young Center who is continuing to work for immigrant children who, all of you that are continuing to fight, that are supporting the Young Center, that are supporting the advocates, supporting the children, fighting against the laws that are being made right now that are completely inhuman and inhumane and should be illegal. Thank you all, because it really does make a difference. Even if one child is reached, that is a life.
Thank you so much, Maaza. We appreciate you so much. We're so grateful for your time, for your advocacy, and just your immeasurable compassion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.